What's up, everybody? Welcome back to a brand new Wayfinders episode. We're joined by a very special guest, Josiah Simmons. Josiah, tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into the episode.
As you said, my name is Josiah Simmons. I'm from South Dakota, which is the greatest state in the United States of America. This coming election, I will be voting for Kamala Harris. I pretend like I know how to do graphic design. I love to read, and I currently live in Amarillo, Texas.
I think that pretty much sums you up.
That sums up the whole of my personality.
Yeah, honestly, that was. But today, the topic that we want.
No, we are not restarting. Get in your seat. Get in your seat. What's the topic?
There was ever an intro for Josiah Simmons. I feel like that just covered it. That covered everything.
As a person, I feel like you just described who you are, fundamentally.
I love Kamala Harris, it's true.
Yeah, that was great. Now, he did say that if he was going to come on, we had to have a specific topic.
Because these guys, worst podcast in the world. Sorry, I don't know if I can say that.
It might be, no. It's
worst podcast in the world? Because they don't have topic. I said, if I'm coming on, you need to give me something 3 days in advance so we can have notes and actually have a conversation.
Maybe this is the start of a new era of an organized, topic-driven podcast.
And I specifically said it needs to be a topic narrow enough that you could build an essay around it, that you could have a thesis statement. That's what I wanted. Well, Victor, what was the topic? How narrow is it?
It is not very narrow, to be honest with you. But it's somewhat narrow. So I want to talk about love today. But we've already talked about love in a previous episode, but it was in relationship to God. But today I want to talk about love for people. And that can go for loving the lost or loving people within the church, because I feel like that's something that is not so, how would you say?
Well, I think I don't want to say the UPCI or the Pentecostal movement, but I think there are some sections that devalue love because we look at different organizations and different denominations who seem to overvalue the love of God and undervalue his justice. And it seems like we've flipped the other way, and love has kind of become a dirty word, and talking about God's love too much is incorrect. And I think that it is the topic. If you read the Bible, it is the topic, it is the thing to talk about. So I think, as broad as it is, I think it's a good topic.
Okay, and I was just about to say, like, I had presented that idea to you, and you're like, all right, yeah, I can talk about it's in the entire Bible. Like, we need to get, and that's why I kind of wanted to hone in on people, in general, because I feel like, Jesus himself, like, the first and great commandment is to love God, but then the next is to love people.
Right.
And I believe I have it here. Let me just turn there really quickly. I have crazy bookmarks, by the way. So in John 13, 34 and 35, it reads this way. A new commandment I give unto you, that ye love one another as I have loved you, and ye also love one another. By this shall all men know that ye are my disciples, and if ye have a love one to another. So we see in only 2 verses, he says it, how many times was that? 3 times? Love one another, love one another, love one another. And what, I guess, points out to me, and I guess I'm just going to jump into it because I've been reading this book. It's called The Four Tables. If you've given me 2 minutes of your time within the past couple months, I've probably told you about this book.
Shout out King Gurley.
Yes.
Man of God.
So he talks about, so the book is about 4 tables, and it's about the vision Ezekiel had about the 4 tables. And he talks about 4 fundamental things every believer should have, and that is to love, to grow, to serve, and to go. But specifically on the second table, which is grow, I was reading it and I was ready to be like, oh, I'm gonna grow. Like, what is the secret to growth? And his whole thing was connecting with people and loving people. And he says in his book, where is it? Sorry.
So while you look for that, what you were saying triggered something in me. So I think this is really cool. I just found out about this. I was just reading about it. The most successful addiction recovery program is Alcoholics Anonymous. It's not just alcoholism anymore. They cover numerous addictions. But they have their 12-step program. And these 12 steps are very famous, and it is statistically proven to be the most successful program for recovery from any kind of addiction. And there's all these steps, like I believe step number 3 is you have to seek forgiveness, and there's all these things along the way. But once you get to step 12, step 12 is you go and you help somebody else, because that is the most effective way. If you just do 11 steps, it's proven you're probably going to relapse. But if you go and you do that 12th step and you become someone's sponsor and you help someone who's struggling with the same thing that you were, you are exponentially more likely to break free from your addiction, because that's the way that we're wired. Is I'm not meant to just solve everything myself. I'm meant to work, to do the work, to go through those 11 steps in that program, but then to say, no, I'm going to help somebody else. Like, this isn't just for me.
Right.
I'm going to connect with somebody else and help somebody else. And that is scientifically, that's in our wiring. It's in the way that God made us, is that connection. That's how we grow. I can't grow without helping somebody else grow.
Right. I mean, you might have just covered everything I was ever going to say in this whole podcast. No, but like that was I think that was a great way to explain. Like, what I was about to say was that he said to love one another 3 times, right? And we see that this is just before Calvary, his last words, and last words are important words. You know, so we see that he cares and he's concerned with how fellow believers treat one another. And I guess how we treat the lost in itself. And like you saying that we should go and like in those 12 steps, the last one, helping someone else. I feel like as believers, if we see someone, either if it's someone that's new to church, someone that's been in church, whether it be your youth group, whether it be in your hyphen group, something like that, we should be constantly trying to help each other and trying to constantly help each other grow. It was something in the book. I was since we're on this topic already, he mentions, Ken Gurley talks about when he was younger, he would need a ride to church. And he said there was this older guy that would pick him up and take him back. He goes, but one day he went to youth service and something that the man had said or preached about was stuck with him. And it was, how do you know the will of God? So he said on this car ride, he turns to the guy and he's like, so how do you know the will of God? And he said that he gave the best answer that he could, but he himself was struggling with that answer. But he said it was in moments like that, car rides like that, moments together with his friends and with people of like faith, that he grew the most. Because he says that when we're stumped, when we have questions, when we don't exactly know, because we don't know everything. I don't know everything. Josiah's pretty close, and Isaac definitely doesn't.
All right.
But no,
All right.
no. All jokes aside, we should be able to ask each other questions. We should
Right.
be able to lean on each other and help one another, even if we are almost, I guess, like we are equals, obviously. But like
peers.
we should be able to look to one another and ask for help, if that makes
100%.
sense, and build each other up, in a sense. But I guess I'll just jump into something else.
Well, before you do that, because you mentioned it, you mentioned the first commandment, and this is another thought that popped in my head before we get too far, and I don't mean to talk too much.
No, you're good.
Feel free
You're the
to talk.
guest. I want you to talk more than me.
I feel like Isaac is the 2 words.
I'm letting
no
you take
hate,
it.
no hate. But that first commandment, it is so powerful, because that's the prayer, the Shema, that every single Jewish child grew up from the age of at the latest 3-4 years old. They grew up saying that prayer multiple times a day. The Lord your God is one, and you shall love the Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And Jesus piggybacks on that, and he takes it a step further with what you just read. But just that commandment and just saying that and just telling God, like we're talking about love, and that word that's translated when he says you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, that word soul is literally translated as life. And so when you pray that prayer, when those people were praying those prayer constantly, day after day, multiple times a day, these specific words, they were saying, like, I'm going to love the Lord first with all my heart. My affections and my intentions will be towards him, but I'm also going to love him with my life. And when it comes to it, and for them, especially the early Christians, as they were realizing that their hope for Messiah had come, and as they were following this new way, a lot of them were called upon to fulfill that prayer and to say, yeah, I will love the Lord with all my life. And there's a story of this rabbi, and it seems to be historically backed up. You can look it up if you want. I can't remember his name, but text me and I'll send you his name. Message me on Instagram, I guess.
We'll put his number across the screen.
We'll put it in the show notes. But there's this rabbi, and he got caught when the Romans were persecuting the Jews, which was constantly as Christianity was beginning. And this rabbi gets caught, and his followers are all there, and he's slowly getting tortured to death by these hot combs that they're raking through his flesh. And continually, while they're doing this, he's saying, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord, the Lord our God is one, and you shall love the Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind." And his followers are like, this is excruciating pain that you're in. How can you possibly keep this? How can you possibly hold this and keep saying it and keep testifying to it? And he said just what I just kind of talked about is, he was like, all my life I've prayed this prayer. I'll love the Lord my God with all my heart, with all my life. And he's like, I've always been scared, and I've been gripped by the fear that I wouldn't be able to live up to it. And when the moment came, I wouldn't be able to give my life. And he's like, and now that I'm here, like, I've realized that I can, and I am going to give my life, and I am going to fulfill this prayer that I've been praying. And I think that speaks to, we're talking about different forms of love, but the love that we are to have to God is, we have to be willing, and we're very lucky and very blessed to live where we live in the time that we live, where it's unlikely that we'll be called upon to give our lives for God as martyrs, or to be tortured like that. But to have that in your heart to say, if that comes, if God calls me to a close country, if things do get crazy in America, if whatever happens, like, I'm going to love the Lord my God and give my life for him.
That's good. One thing that I was thinking of was, and I don't want to get too personal, but personally, what do you think is the hardest way to love somebody? What challenges your love the most?
So I think you answer first. I just talked for a long time.
I was hoping you go first, but I'll go first.
I'll go first.
And I actually, real quick before I answer that question, he talked about that rabbi that was actually getting the opportunity to not only just, he's said it his whole life, but to live it out almost. And I was thinking as you were saying that, in this book, he speaks about a fear that he has. And he says a lot of times people look at each other and they're like, we're not meant to have fears or anything like that. He goes, but I do have a fear. He goes, and I have a fear that my heart does not endorse the words that I speak. And it's like, how many times do we speak words and they're empty words? They have no meaning because our heart's not in it. Our love is not speaking through the words that we say. We may say that we love God. We may publicly do it, but do our actions show it? And I think that was a perfect story to just like really, he was finally like, and obviously you know the story way better than me, but from the way you just told it, like, they weren't words to him. They were so much more than that.
For sure. And I think in a digital age, in an age where everybody is putting their best foot forward and they want to seem like the best person, I think that almost fake love has become so much more prevalent, you know? Like, I can tell you I love you, and I can do all the right things, and I can go out with you, and I can do all of the stuff, but do you really mean it? And that's really the heart of the question that I asked, was like,
I can sign up on your story.
Love? Yeah?
I can send a heart. I can literally be connected with hundreds of women who don't care about me at all,
and
but
who
if I
might
just
not care
swipe
about.
right on this app, and I can get that gratification, but that's not love.
I think in today's age, loving somebody has become more so for us than it is for the other person. Like, I love you because it makes me feel better, and I'm a good person because I think it validates who I am. And I think even in the Christian world and even in the church world, we have lost the emphasis of others.
And I think it's like what you were saying, like, and you were talking about it too, but like kind of that social media aspect, you're gaining something. So it's like, how often do we do things for worldly gain? We'll love if we know that we're getting something in return. We'll do this if I know that Josiah is going to do this for me, you know? And it's like, love is not love anymore. It's love, and what do I gain? What can I take?
So then let me flip my question from earlier. How do you love somebody when you're not being loved back?
I love this question. I love this question because I've recently asked that question. And my thing is that a lot of times in my life, I feel like I've loved people, and maybe I haven't loved people the best way that I should, or the best way that I know. But in certain points in my life, I feel like I give to people and I give and I love and I try with friendships, I try with this and I try with that, and it seems like they don't give back, you know, and and it seems like they don't give back. No, it was a joke between us a while ago, but
Puddles and oceans.
yeah, it was crossing oceans. But in that aspect of like, I feel like I give and I never receive. And I asked this person, I said, what do you do when you love and you love and you love and they don't love you back? And I was like, because it's hard for me. Because I'm like, how many times am I going to show myself and prove myself that I love them, yet they won't make time for me, yet they won't be there for me, or they won't pick up the phone, or they won't text back. And I'm constantly having to text first. I'm constantly having to call first. I'm constantly having to walk up to them in church and shake their hand because they're not going to come to me, you know? And I was like, how long do I have to do that? And because like we've been talking about, we're called to love people. And that's really what I want to do. I want to love people. And it's just hard when they don't do it back, you know? And he told me, he said, has there ever been a moment where you weren't living for God? And I was like, okay. I was like, well, I've been in it my whole life. I said, but if I'm honest, I can say that I've been in church and there's been moments where I just sat through services. And like, I wasn't in the service. Like I kind of just went and I left. And he said, okay, let's say in those times, he goes, did God ever stop loving you? And I was like, well, no. He goes, that's right. He goes, love is one-sided. He goes, it can be one-sided. He said, if you're loving people and they're not loving you back, if you're loving people for God, then it's irrelevant if you ever get that love back. You should love them just to love them because God's commanded it. Like, and not just to be like, oh, God commanded me, so now I must.
Exactly.
But because if God loves them, I should love them. If I love God and I love the things He teaches and I want to follow what He's taught, then I need to learn to love people and not expect it back because it's not always going to come back, and that's okay.
So good.
Yeah. What I was going to say, which is very similar to what he said to your question, how do you love somebody when they don't love you back? If you're asking that question, where my mind immediately goes to, read the book of Hosea. Read about this prophet, and there's a certain period. Okay, I'm going to hop on a soapbox. If you watching this right now,
Yeah.
if you do not believe, or if you overvalue the New Testament, and you don't read the Old Testament, and you skip over the prophets, or you skip over Lamentations and Ecclesia, there's so much wisdom and there's so much power in the Old Testament and in the prophets, and you're reading and you're like, dude, this person killed this person and this person begot this person begot this. But I'm telling you, if you can dive into it and you can study it, read the book of Hosea, where there's this prophet, and at this time is when, how pretty much all throughout history, the Jewish people, the people that God chose, the people that God gave everything that they have, that He gave them their land, they're in this roller coaster where it's constantly, we kind of serve God and then we build idols and we fall away and we do promiscuous things with foreign women, and there's all these roller coasters. And so God tells the prophet Hosea, go marry this prostitute. And he does, and they have children, and then he leaves. And then she leaves. She leaves him, and she becomes a prostitute again. And God says, go get her. And so Hosea goes and gets her, and he brings her back. And they have children, and then she leaves again, and God says, go get her back. And all of this was an illustration for Hosea to communicate to the Israelite people, this is what you're doing to God. Like, God cares about you in the way that you care about your wife, when you are joined together in that love, and you would do anything for them, and you don't love anyone but them. And then she runs away, and she goes back, and she's doing these things that she should only be doing with you, with all these other men, for very little, right? And it helps us get an understanding of, this is the pain that God feels.
Exactly right.
When I pull away, when I say, no, like, I don't know if I really believe that, or I don't know if I really need to follow that, or like, okay, I understand that this is true, but it's too hard for me, so I'm not going to do it, or I'm not going to love God with all my heart. I'm not going to set my intentions towards Him. I'm not going to set my thoughts towards Him. There's so many things in so many ways that literally all of us here have fallen away from Him. And when we do that, like we read that story of Hosea and we're like, oh, she's a horrible woman. She just runs
Right.
away and she keeps
Exactly.
going back to prostitution. And she's, how could she do that when she has a loving husband? Well, like, the church is the bride of Christ, and we understand that when we fall away from God and when we fall into sin, that's what we're doing to God.
Yeah.
And so when you ask, how do you love someone when it feels like they don't love you back? Well, you have at least been on the opposite side. You have an example of you have been loved when you haven't loved back.
Right.
And so I think that's a good place to start, is to say, okay, how does God love me? And we know this is the love that we're called to experience and then to share with others. And I don't want to talk for too long, but also in the New Testament, when we look at the life of Jesus, you talked about last words leading up to when he's getting crucified. He's in the Garden of Gethsemane and he's praying, he's saying, please let this cup pass from me. And we read that not only is he just praying and petitioning that he doesn't have to do this because he really doesn't want to, because he's about to go through so much on our behalf, but he's so anxious. He experiences, we see that Luke writes that his sweat was as blood. And there's an actual, I would always read that and be like, that's strange. Like,
Right.
is that possible to be so intense or praying so hard? I'm like, well, do I just need to pray harder so that I start sweating blood? But there's an actual medical condition called hematohydrosis, and it's parallel. It's when your blood vessels start to break and your sweat starts to come through with blood and blood starts to come out. And it can be caused by intensity, but more commonly it's caused by intense anxiety and intense fear and that intense agony. And so when you see that, the picture of Jesus in the garden, it's not just one of him intensely praying for that cup to be passed, but it's one of him gripped by feelings that I think we all know well, of anxiety. And he knows what's going to happen. He knows the pain that his body's going to go through. And he's feeling this anxiety and this fear, so much so to an extent that I don't think many of us can relate to, where the blood begins to fall. And true love, loving somebody who doesn't love you back, it looks like Jesus experiencing that anxiety and that, if you want to call it a panic attack or whatever words you want to use to describe that, but he's experiencing that and he's still choosing me. And he's still choosing the pain of the cross when he knows I'm going to run away. I'm going to say bad things about him. I'm going to commit wrong acts in his name. I'm going to do all these things. I'm going to fall into sin. I'm going to say I love him with my mouth, but not mean it with my heart. I'm going to do all these things. And he knows that. And he's experiencing this, and he's still choosing me. And it especially looks like, I think the greatest example of love that we have in the Bible is when he's on the cross and he's battered and he's beaten and he's within an inch of death. And he's crying out, my God, why have you forsaken me? And Jeremy Painter, one of my favorite teachers, talks about it. He's like, the Christian God for at least 1 second seemed to look like an atheist. Like, he's in this great amount of pain, but he's still able to then say, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. The very people who put the nails in his wrists and the spear in his side, he still forgives them, and he still died for them as much as he died for you and me. And they didn't love him. There were just a handful of people at his crucifixion, not even all the disciples. And he still went to the cross. And so when you talk about loving someone who doesn't love you back, like, that's not like a higher calling, or like only certain people are called to do that, or only the super spiritual can do that or should do that. That is like a bare minimum requirement.
Right.
Because we
That's
shouldn't
good.
be here.
Yeah.
Like, we're the dogs begging for scraps at the table. And so like the bare minimum requirement is that we understand I'm only here because he did this for me. And so I've got to understand that I've got to do that for others. And no matter what you do to me or anybody does to me, no matter how hard it is, and it is extremely difficult, like, the bare minimum requirement is for me to love others like Jesus loved me.
That's so good. So good. I always think of, my mind goes back when I think about love, is the parable that Jesus taught of the prodigal, and the relationship between the prodigal and his father, and the difference between the father and the brother. Because whenever the prodigal leaves, and whenever he lives this wrong life, we see on his journey back that his father welcomes him with love and embrace, and his brother is almost upset at his father for loving him. And we see like, Father, how could you do this? How could you give the son that ran away from you, that lives against you, your robe? How could you give him his ring? How could you give him the best of your animals and hold this feast? And I think the answer to that is love should always be in the interest of the reciprocant. Like, I don't love somebody for me because I don't believe that's truly love. I think if you love somebody, like if I love Victor, everything that I want to do is in his best interest, and everything that I say to him and everything that I do is because I want him to be saved, and I want him to be as good as he can.
Right. I think love is being intentional. And I think we see that with a lot of things that we do in this walk with God. Like, everything that we do has to be intentional, whether that's praying, whether that's loving people, whether that's reading your word. And going back to what you just said when you were talking about Jesus on the cross, and he says, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Like, I've heard so many people, like, why did he say that? Like, I've heard so many different things. But one thing that someone said, and now it's not doctrine, it's not like for sure, it's not factual, but he was like, he said that so that you would never have to. And like, so many times we see the love of God, like, it's almost become like, or the phrase like, Jesus loves you. Like, it's almost become, cliche, is that the right word?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, people just use it openly and like things like this, but it's like, it's so true. It rings so true. And like, I think when we think about loving one another, like, we have a responsibility to one another. Like, as believers, we are now responsible to love each other, to be there for each other. And I'm sorry I keep going back to this book, but there's a section that he talks about the importance of one another and how we should be there for one another. And I'm just going to read this. It's not short, but I just want to touch on it because it was so, like, when I read it, I was like, I can't believe that. Because as believers, we're like, we need to love each other. Oh, we know this, you know? And it's like, we know it, but we don't do it. And that's not to say like, oh, you don't love people, but it's like, oh, we know the Bible says that we need to love people, and we know that Jesus commands us to love people. But I never realized how many times we're meant to be there for one another, right? So it says, Jesus was obviously concerned that his followers would be devoted to each other. The Apostle Paul used this phrase time and again. Be devoted to one another in brotherly love. That's Romans 12:10. And then goes on, honor one another above their own selves. Romans 12:10. Live in harmony with one another. Romans 12:18. Love one another. Romans 13:8. Don't pass judgment on one another. Romans 14:13. Accept one another as they were accepted by Christ. Romans 15:7. Have equal concern for one another. 1 Corinthians 12:25. Serve one another in love. Galatians 5:13. Encourage one another. 1 Thessalonians 4:18. Admonish one another. Colossians 3:16. Greet one another with a holy kiss. 1 Corinthians 16:20. Now the author goes, I'm still struggling a bit with the last one, but and then we see the Apostle James in his short book, don't slander one another, don't grumble against each other, confess faults to one another, pray for each other. Simon Peter also mentioned this expression several times. Love one another deeply from the heart. 1 Peter 3:8. Live in harmony with one another. 1 Peter 3:8. Love each other deeply. 1 Peter 4:8. The Apostle Paul, John, repeats the same commandment. And every time that he mentions one another, it's just love one another, love one another, love one another, love one another, love one another.
Yeah.
So about 59 times in the New Testament, we read of our duty and responsibility to love one another. And this devotion and this being there for one another is not just to give lip service or to just throw it out there, but it is to show from an overflowing heart. Like, as believers, we should be overflowing with this love. Mm-hmm. And like, I've talked to Isaac about this recently. I'm like, I kind of have to put myself in check quite a bit. Like, there's because as much as we should love, sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes you have to love people you don't necessarily like.
Yeah.
I believe you can love somebody and not like them.
It's
not literally.
So
I knew if I said that and he thought I like actually meant it, he's gonna go off. Not literally.
I just hate that phrase. I hate that phrase because it's a way to diminish people and then still pay the lip service. So
Right.
not you, but I've
No,
heard people.
I know what you mean.
People
Say like, well,
There's
love them but don't
interesting-
like them, and they use it
yeah.
as an excuse to push them away.
People who know me will know specifically what I'm talking about. But there's one person
I've heard arguments on this, by the way. But go ahead.
who would use that phrase all the time. Like, I have to love you, but I don't have to like you. And it's like, I don't think, like he was saying, it's a way to pay lip service. The Bible tells me I have to love you, but like, I really don't like you. Like, I think that's just kind of a rude thing to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah. Probably wouldn't say it to their face.
And love is a much deeper feeling
Right.
than liking. Like, it's really easy to like someone. It's really hard to love someone.
Mm.
So I don't
That's
really agree with saying, well, like, yeah, I love you, but I don't think you can love somebody without liking them. Because to love somebody is to love them like Jesus loved them, and to see people the way Jesus saw them, and to treat them the way Jesus treated them, and the way Jesus saw everybody, and the way God sees us, and the way we should see each other as people created in God's own image. So no matter who it is, if I say I don't like you, I'm saying I don't like the imago Dei of God. Like,
Can you explain that word
image
to
of
Victor?
This guy. You're funny.
And so that's why I really hate that phrase. But
I agree, but to counteract that, there are people in my life, or have been in my life, that I loved, that I truly loved, and the best way to love them was from a distance, because they did not like me.
Yeah.
And
But that is different
There's
than not.
boundaries.
and
Exactly.
I think you can.
I think there's a balance, because one of y'all go ahead.
So-
'cause both of y'all are ready to blow up.
So I was just listening. This is another lesson I was listening to from Jeremy Painter. Jeremy Painter, if you're watching this, I literally love you. I hope to meet you one day, man of God.
Man of God.
But anyway, I was listening to him talk, and he talks about Paul. And when Paul talks about, I prayed and I got a thorn in the flesh, and I prayed and I asked God to remove it. 3 times I prayed and I asked God to remove it, and he said no. And he said, my grace is sufficient for you. That was his response. And it's interesting. Different people have different opinions of what Paul's thorn in the flesh was. But
Real quick, what do y'all think it was? This is not doctrine.
homosexuality.
Really? I think it was blindness.
No, I don't. That's not
Bro, I was about to
I
say,
do.
what
Oh,
in
I
the
thought you were
world?
okay.
I was like, that's
okay,
crazy.
not doctrine. We don't have to linger on this at all. I think it was blindness.
So I'll send the link to you. You should watch it because he kind of debunks the blindness thing.
Please.
What do you think it is?
You know, I just want to hear you guys.
In the context of what he's writing to, it seems to be the thorn in his flesh, because he's writing it in 2 Corinthians, and the Corinthian church were maybe the biggest struggle that Paul had to go through, because it's a church he started, he leaves, and then they prefer all these other
Exactly.
teachers and preachers over
And then
him.
he has to
and
keep
they-
going. Yeah.
They're falling into chaos, and he has to correct them, and they're saying, no, don't come back until you do this, this, and this. And he's like, there's all these things going on with him.
I would have lost it if I was Paul. I'm gonna be so honest.
100%. Paul's
Man of God.
greatest, the greatest.
The greatest.
The second to Jesus, I don't think there's anybody whose life you can gain more from beyond the point, or who's led a more interesting life.
And for somebody to stay so relevant, I feel like anything that Paul teaches or condones today is still.
And there's a thought. This is going even more off
Lord.
off
Hallelujah.
topic, but there's a thought that there's something wrong with being academically minded and equipping yourself with learning with knowledge.
Victor thinks there's something wrong with that.
Well, Victor
I
thinks you
def-
shouldn't have a job if you're
Oh my
Victor thinks
days.
do not make money. If you make above 45,000 a
Brother,
year,
that is not.
You're
See,
good. Okay. Anyway,
that's not even fair. Go
Victor
ahead.
does think that though.
Oh my days.
But anyway, Paul was able to reach so many people because he was so academically gifted. Like he was the perfect marriage of knowledge of the word, of even society, of philosophy, and the spirit. Like he wasn't too heavy one or too
Shout out
heavy the
Gamaliel.
other. And that's how he was able to reach so many people, because no one has ever been or probably will ever be as good at Paul as he says in his own words, to the Jews I became a Jew, to the Greeks I became a Greek. Wherever he went, he was able to switch the way he talked, even the dialect, the languages he spoke, because he knew, I think, 4 different languages. And
Shout out
he was able
Gamaliel
to go
again.
from Mars Hill to the home of a Jewish tent maker,
Exactly.
to the synagogue, to a Gentile gathering of Christ followers. Like he was able to do all this so well because of his academic background. But that's not important to the love. What I was going to say is the thorn in his flesh. Dr. Painter makes a convincing argument that the thorn in his flesh was the people who kept coming against him, and he would try and he'd start a work, and these people were basically stabbing him in his back. And as he goes through this teaching, he makes such an amazing point where he says that the thorn was an attack from Satan. The scripture literally says it was a messenger, an angel of Satan gave him the thorn in his side. It was a spiritual attack from Satan, but God used it for his purposes because of those people, or because of that thorn, if you don't subscribe to the theory that it was these specific people who were backbiting him, because of those things he remained humble, and he was able to diminish in his own eyesight, and God was able to increase because of that thorn. So when you're talking about people who you have to love for a distance because they don't like you, or they're hateful towards you, or that might be your thorn, right? Like that might be that thing that's an attack, and those specific people, they might not be thinking about God, or they might not be thinking about love, or what they're supposed to do, or how they're supposed to treat you, but that could be like that spiritual attack that God is twisting. He's saying, if you can keep your heart right, and if you can choose not to attack them and not to repay evil for evil, but to say, no, God, your grace is sufficient for me, I can still love them. And yeah, of course you have to love some people from a distance, and there has to be boundaries. But that attack can be turned for your good, and it keeps me humble when people don't like me. Like if nobody didn't like me, if nobody didn't like any of us, we would be the most arrogant people in the world. Like this guy. No,
what is going on?
That was not loving.
We're here to love
Despite the slander, I love you both.
I love you too, Vic.
Despite the slander.
That's the only reason I'm here.
All right.
Crazy. Such with that.
If you're listening to this in audio, you're gonna want to watch it.
Please. Nobody listens to this on audio.
I know some people.
We have about. Do you listen to it on audio? Yeah. Really?
I listen and I watch.
You're one. Really? You're one of these 6 people on Spotify that listen to it on audio. Pretty sure.
That's crazy.
Yeah. What do you want to say, Vic?
No, there was something that I wanted to add on before I said, despite the slander, I love you both. We were talking about loving people, and obviously, but I mean, like he was saying, loving them from a distance, and like we talked about liking and loving, and it's like as much as I feel like there's a very big majority of people who really do believe that you don't have to like, but you can love. Mm-hmm. I've heard arguments made, and like there was times where I thought that because I was kind of like, because sometimes it's hard. Like that's the thing. I think
I will admit there's been a time in my life where I have used that phrase as an excuse to isolate myself from somebody and say, I love them, so I'm not going to talk to them.
Right.
And I think a lot of people have done that.
But I think even in like, because you talked about loving from a distance, and like that phrase that you just said, I feel like you showing love for them is not putting yourself in an incident where things may be said that you don't want to say, or like putting yourself in situations where something, like, sometimes there's rude people. Sometimes you can be that rude person. Sometimes I can be rude. Mm-hmm. And, all right. And like when you can kind of, if you're around that person, and sometimes something can rise up and you can respond in a rude way, and it's like, if I love them, I don't want to hurt them. But sometimes you have to learn to push past that. And because if you really do love them, I feel like you would make the effort to push past the distance. And it's not easy, and it's not something that I do greatly in myself. But I think if you truly love someone, you can love them from a distance, but I think the more you understand love, the closer you'll try to be with them.
For sure.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, and there always has to be that balance, because some people, if you try to love them too much, they'll get agitated, and then that's a problem on their end.
Right,
You know,
right.
so-
And
no, I'm agreeing with what
balance.
you're saying, exactly. But I think being adaptable to whoever you're talking to, because I don't love Josiah the same way that I love you. I share the same love, but I don't like put that out in the same way, you know?
Right, you can show it in different ways.
Exactly.
I think so.
Just he's about to disagree with everything you just said.
No, it's not necessarily a disagreement. I just made a really weird noise directly into this mic.
Oh,
I was
heard.
clearing my throat. But so the thing with if you love someone, you won't be at a distance. I agree, but I disagree. So our framework for how we love people is how God loves us, right? And there comes a point, right, when I walk away from God and I make a conscious choice to be far from him and to do my own thing and to make myself my own God, where he says, okay, you've made this decision. So C.S. Lewis, favorite author, he's fantastic. And he has a very short and easy to read books. One of them is, what's it called? The Great Divorce. And it's an allegory, and it's this bus ride from purgatory. C.S. Lewis was Catholic.
Yep.
From purgatory to hell, right? But it's so good. I'm telling you, it's so good. There's a line in it where this angel tells our main character, he says, there are two kinds of people. There are the people who say to God, your will be done, and the people to whom God says, sadly, your will be done.
My goodness.
Because if I tell God constantly over and over, it's my will, I'm my God, eventually he's going to say, okay. And he's not happy about it. He's completely devastated and brokenhearted in the same way that Hosea was when his wife went back to prostitution. But he's not going to force me to go to heaven. If I tell God I don't want anything to do with you, he's not going to force me to be in his presence for eternity. There's a give and take of, so as we apply that to like a relationship where someone who I'm like, I need to love and they might not love me back or they might not be returning energy, but I still feel called to love them. Well, that's true. And to that person, I think there comes a point when if you have a genuine heart and a loving heart and they continually reject that and continually reject that, when you kind of have to do that same thing and sadly say like, okay, if this is your will, like, then there's nothing I can do.
Exactly.
I can't force you. I can't drag you into church. I can't drag you to repentance. But the moment that you decide and the moment you realize that this path you've made and this idol you've made of yourself is not helpful and it's actually throwing your life into the moment you decide that you want to come, I'm going to be there. I'm going to be right
It's the
there.
father talking to the prodigal.
Yeah, there's a poem called The Hound of Heaven where it talks about God as a hound who I'm walking away from him, but he is ceaselessly chasing after me. And no matter how far I go, I just have to turn around and he's right there. And I think that's kind of a good mental picture of how to love someone like that. Like if you walked away from God and said, Victor, you need to get back, and you kept consciously making that decision, I'm going to be right behind you when you turn around.
Exactly.
And I'm going to grab you and take you to the altar when you decide that you want to make that decision again in this hypothetical scenario. And that's my way of loving you like God. But I can't make your decisions for you.
Exactly. People always say, if God was so loving, then how come everybody wouldn't go to heaven? If God loved the whole world like he says he does, how come he didn't take the whole world to go to heaven? But love isn't forced.
Yeah.
Love is saying, I can't make you love me back, but whenever you do, just like he said, I'm going to be there. In the same way that God loves the world, he will not force somebody to spend time with him. He will never force somebody into eternity with God, but he will always be there when you turn back. And that is something that I think as humans, we struggle with the most, is because if Victor hurts me and he hurts me again and he hurts me again, there comes a point in my life, maybe sooner rather than later, that I am not going to want to love him anymore, as opposed to God, who says, no matter how many times, I'm always going to be there.
Yeah. Go ahead. I've talked too much.
No, you're fine. You're about to go somewhere.
There was a time, so I really like what he said, because there was a time when that argument seemed to be true in my ears, when the argument that he debunked of if God loved everybody, why would we not go to heaven? And why would everybody not go to heaven? Why would he sentence some people to hell or
Sentence.
I know sentence. Sentence. I don't know what happened there, scratch
No,
that.
no,
Take
no,
it from
no.
the tape.
I think that's a
But
good way.
I didn't mean to
say
stop
that,
you. I meant
but
sentence because
genuinely.
like God doesn't sentence any.
Yeah,
like,
I got you.
Nothing against you. Keep going.
No, I see
please.
what you're saying. And literally, that quote from C.S. Lewis in that book was one of the things where my understanding began to shift a little bit. And it really does make complete sense that so heaven is so great. It's not so great because there's mansions and there's streets of gold. It's those things are a result of it being God's holy presence unfiltered, because it's always unfiltered. We are never going to experience the intensity of a world where you have love and you never have pain, where you have joy and you never have sadness. Like, we can't even comprehend that.
Right.
But
Sometimes there's pain and love. Like the idea, I don't mean to interrupt you.
No, you're good.
The idea of love without bounds is like, I don't think we can fully realize that until we get to heaven.
Our brains can't grasp it.
Literally.
Right? And heaven is so great because God's presence is there. And in God's presence is the fullness of love and the fullness of joy. But all these things are, God is the source of all these things. They come from God, these positive emotions that we look to. But if while I'm on earth, I make the decision that no, I don't want to be with you. There's a verse, I think it's in Revelation, that says if you can't walk with the footmen, you can't run with the horses.
Right.
It's like, if while I'm on earth, I can't choose God, I'm not going to get to just magically change and choose him when I get to heaven, or that proverbial judgment where Peter's there. But when we talk about hell isn't so bad because of boiling pits of fire and because of eternal torture and damnation, or however you want to look at hell, whatever your picture of hell is, whatever your theology on hell is. It's not so bad because of those things. It's so bad because God isn't there. And in the same way that on earth we can never experience the fullness of God's presence and the fullness of his holiness because we're material bodies, we have never experienced the complete lack of his presence.
So true.
There's never been a moment in our lives or in anybody's lives, whether they're far or close to God, where they have experienced a complete lack of his presence. And so that's what makes hell so bad, is there is no love. We can't comprehend not loving something or someone. There is no joy. There is no peace. There's none of these things because God's not there. And God's the source of it. And when you understand it, that complete, like, it's not God's fault that he's throwing you to hell and it's so,
Right.
like, you chose that you don't want him and you want nothing to do with the things that he's the source of. So he's going to say, sadly, your will be done.
Exactly right.
And I think to that, like, first of all, that was great. Second of all, like, you talking about that, like, that whole, I guess, idea that if God loved everyone, then everybody would go to heaven. But it's like, it does come down to decision, and that and intention, like we were speaking about earlier. Like, it's all about choices. And like, we see that from the very beginning of creation. It was a choice. Like, because people will have asked me, like, well, why did God put the tree of knowledge of good and evil? He didn't want them to take of it. Why put it in there? And it was like, because he wanted them to make the choice. I'm giving you free will. I'm giving you free choice. Like, what you do with that is up to you. But like, in the same way, like, he allows us to do whatever we want. He allows us to go wherever we want. He allows us to watch whatever we want. He allows us to listen to whatever we want. But it's like, are we going to choose God every day that we live? And it's with God, with love in general, it's commitment, it's devotion, it's decision. And with God, it's a lifetime decision. It's a lifetime devotion. It's a lifetime commitment. And I know I've kind of quoted what I've quoted in the previous episodes, but it's like, when we do talk about love, what is love? God is love.
God is love. First clip ever.
But like, God is truly love. It is not like, it isn't that, it is not something that is an ability, or like, he is love in itself. Like, when you think about what love is it's God, you know? And the same way that he's not going to force me to love Isaac, he's not going to force me to love Josiah, he's not going to force me to love anybody. I have to make that decision. I have to make that intention. I'm going to be intentional. I'm going to love. I'm going to be kind. I'm going to be patient. And you know, I have to be patient with Isaac. It happens. No, but I'm being serious. Like, all the things where, let me see, love is patient, love is kind. Like, it's all these things, and we have to choose that daily. It is a choice that we have to make. And you know, sometimes it's easier with some, and it's harder with others, but it's still a decision that has to be made.
Exactly right.
And a decision if we are to be true followers of Christ, or like, it's a decision we have to make that decision. You know, no matter how hard it gets, no matter the love we don't get back, we have to choose to love people.
Yeah, you don't get to choose whether or not you serve a God. The only thing you get to choose is what God that will be.
Oh my
yourself,
goodness,
or the God who created the universe. In the same way that
So good.
in the same way that you don't get to choose what yoke, or you don't get to choose if a yoke is around your neck. You just get to choose if it's the yoke of sin, which leads to death, or if it's the yoke that is easy and the burden that's light of Christ, which leads to life. Like there is still going to be a yoke. There's going to be something that we are serving and something that is positioning and encouraging us in a direction maybe different than we would go on our own. Like there's still going to be something there, but there's one which leads to death and there's one which leads to life.
Right.
And that's what we get to choose. That's the only thing we get to choose.
That's good. That's really good. I think I'm always the guy that closes it out. We're coming up on like maybe 15 minutes. I think that's a great way to close it. Is there anything else that y'all want to say? By the way, leave this stuff here for a photo.
I mean, I feel like
I cut him off short. He's only halfway through.
the thing
We can
about
keep going. If y'all want to do a two-parter, I'm so down.
it doesn't have to be a two-parter. We'll just continue. If I'm gonna say
Do you
something,
feel led to keep talking?
I just feel like, because how is love shown? How is it displayed? You know, because like we can talk about love all day, but what does love
It's gonna
look
be a
like?
two-parter. That's such a good question.
You know, and it's like, and that's why I love that you guys are here, because I don't have all the answers to that. But like, what does love look like? You look at the early church. What did they do? They did life together. They went from house to house. They broke bread together. And it's like, ministry, life was not meant to live in solitude, but meant to live in fellowship. And that's what Jesus was teaching. Like we see even, I believe it was Paul. Like he would go with others. Like people, he was taking people with him. He wasn't just always by himself or going alone.
Go by himself. Exactly.
Like same with Jesus. He chose 12 men to go with him. Like he wasn't going to do ministry alone. Jesus himself, the Word made flesh, ministry, love, everything that he could be, he still called for people to be with him. He's still called to do ministry together, to do life together. And I think that's what, and I think there's a lot more answers to that question. What does love look like? And it seems like you have something to say.
No, I was just, not necessarily about love, but I think it's so cool what you just said about how he called 12. Because Jesus had 3 years of ministry. He had 33 years on this life. You and I and anybody, the most charismatic, gifted, Holy Ghost-filled, anointed preacher, teacher, cannot reach the entire world in 33 years, and certainly not in 3 years of public ministry. And so Jesus flipped the paradigm, and he said, I don't have to change the world. I have to change 12 hearts. And if these 12 hearts can change people, and it's going to exponentially go, I don't have to change the world. I have to appear to Paul on the road to Damascus, and he's going to travel farther than I ever did.
Yeah.
Paul spent the entire back half of his life traveling to places that Jesus never went, and sharing the story of Jesus to people who would have never heard him. Because Jesus, and certainly not us, couldn't reach the world in the short time he had. And I don't know if it's the Four Tables. I think it's the Four Tables. It might be a different one, where it talks about discipleship, and the way to change the world is through discipleship. That the best ability I have to change the world isn't to go on Instagram and make a post that I think is good, or to do something online. The best way to change the world is to get coffee with somebody every Saturday and talk to them about Jesus. Like, because then they might go and change 2 people. And it's that exponential growth that's incredible. And I know that's off topic, but I just think that's the coolest thing.
I feel like that's perfectly on topic.
I think just to add on to that, like, and from this book, and I literally highlighted it probably 5 minutes before Isaac walked in. He says, have you been at the table of love? Have you been to the table of love to know how to treat others? And this is not even on the Grow chapter. This is back in love. He goes, there are many people who need you, your words, your time, your talents, and your treasures. We show our love for him by showing our love to others. And he pretty much just says, come to the table of love. But
Yeah.
it's like, this is why it's so important fellowship is important. Being connected, loving one another, because if I don't have Josiah, if I don't have Isaac, if I don't have people in my life, like, and obviously we have our pastor that will speak into our lives and things like that, but we need each other. I need his words. I need his encouragement. Like, the same way Jesus couldn't do it alone and he needed people, like, our pastors can't all do it alone. That's why we have leadership. That's why we have friends. That's why we have people that we need to invest into us, whether that's with our talents, with our words. Like, I feel like words have so much power, and I wish I was better with them. But, like, the way we can, if we didn't have people, like, I don't know where I'd be if there wasn't people that loved me, if there wasn't people that invested in me, and people that cared about me and made time for me. And it's like that. And, like, I think that's why I just have, like, such a strong, like, passion for it. Like, I just want to love people. I want to learn how to love them the right way. You know, I don't want to love them my way. I don't want to love them, like, and that's what the world thinks. Like, the world thinks, oh, I can just love people the way I want to love them, or what is my idea of love. But it's like, I want to love people the way God loved us, the way God loves them. And I think that constant, like, searching and wanting to do better and wanting to be there for people, it as much as I'm imperfect, I really do strive and really try to love people, you know? And it's like, again, I think I've said this before, but it's like, if people know me for one thing, I want them to know that I love people, and I want them to know that I love them. And it's like, a lot of times I'm not great at it. Some people look at me like, oh, look at this guy. Josiah definitely did. What would you say? I believe you said that I look like, when you hadn't even met me, I looked, what was the word? Do you remember?
I don't remember, no.
It was not standoffish, but
Perfect
it was
love is casted out. Uptight.
It was something along those lines.
Could be
Weird, strange.
All right, now we're
Different.
just getting.
I like what you said about that though.
Special.
Like our way of love, like our like, I can't say the word.
Ideology.
Ideology. No, not ideology.
Idea?
Not idea. Ideologized. But I can't get that word out.
I don't think that's a word.
It is a word. Google it. It might not be. If Josiah said it isn't, it's not. No, put the phone away. It isn't. It isn't. I know it isn't. I just wanted to say it. I know it isn't a word. I know it's not. Oh, how somebody speaking to his life right now. Speaking to his life right now. No, speaking to his life. My goodness.
I was wrong.
My goodness.
Wow.
But it's okay.
That's good.
He goes, wow, me
Makes me
wrong?
sad.
Chrissy?
No,
It's
that's
okay.
not true.
You know what? Real quick, arguments and disagreement is not an excuse to like feel like you're not close to somebody. Because this is one of my biggest like pet peeves, and I've seen it so many times.
I disagree with Victor all the time.
And families and then friends, like I know a lot of people that the best way to love each other and to get along is like every single word you say I agree with. And every single thing that you do is like, you know, on par with what I think you should do. And I believe that's not true love. I think like real love, like I love Victor, is whenever he disagrees with me, it's not about the fallout. It's not about the differing opinions. It's about how do we get back. And I think in the church, and I hate to say it, but even especially in like the Pentecostal church and in our movement, that whenever somebody goes astray or whenever somebody goes on another path, how quickly are we and how quickly is the church to shove them away? All the love that we had goes out the window whenever you don't look like me anymore or whenever you don't sound like me anymore.
Goodness.
I'm so sorry. But like, I've seen it time and time again that somebody falls to the wayside and we think the best thing to do is to shun them out and make it their problem. But whenever you fall off, it's my problem. And I think that's what love is. I'm so sorry.
That was big.
I'm so
That
sorry.
was
I
big.
felt that
True.
so strongly.
And like, I think like to jump on that, I guess, like love is also forgiveness. Love is forgiving people for like, the thing is, people are sinning against God. They're not even like, there's people that sin against God and they're not sinning against you. Yet you'll shun them. Yet you'll push them away. You know, and it's like, if God
go on the podcast talk about forgiveness.
If God can forgive, who am I to say I can't? If God can, if my thing is like, if someone did you wrong, if someone made a mistake, if someone did this, and you know, like they may have done those things, but who's to say they can't repent right now and God forgives them? Then who am I to hold on to it? And to go the next day having the same feelings that he's already forgiven them and they sinned against him.
Exactly.
You know, and there are some times where people may, I don't want to say sin against you, but I guess like do you wrong in a sense.
Yeah.
But it's like we like to highlight people's mistakes. Like every good thing that they did before, you can erase it
Doesn't
because
matter.
this one
Never
mistake
Exactly.
is so big that it devalues every good thing that they've ever done. You know, and it'll devalue every good thing that they do after, because you're stuck on a mistake that they made. And it's like we have to learn to forget. And Jesus was big. I mean, I say Jesus was big on forgiveness, but he really was.
Big forgiveness guy. Big forgiveness guy.
You know what I mean? And it's like, I love that you said that, because it's so true.
Yeah.
For sure.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Forgiveness, they say I say this too much, but forgiveness will genuinely change your life. Like,
Oh yeah.
if you're struggling to be close to God, if you're struggling to feel Him, if you're struggling in any aspect, and you look at your life and you say, okay, I'm not saying it's a fix-all, but if you look at your life, look.
I'm gonna pause you right here. This camera will go off in 4 minutes, so I'm gonna snap my fingers and we're gonna be recording again.
We're back.
We're back.
Halfway cut off through Josiah's sentence, but he's gonna start over.
I don't remember what I was saying.
Oh, you're
Alright.
right.
No, I'm just playing. So Victor and Isaac were both talking about forgiveness. And I was talking about how forgiveness will change your life. I don't think that you can experience everything that God has for you until you learn how to forgive people. And secondly, and even more practically, and I think tangible, is the fact that when you hold unforgiveness against somebody, you're not hurting them. Like, the way I think about it in this metaphor popped in my head, or maybe I heard it somewhere and it just resurfaced. I don't want to take credit if it's not mine. But is holding unforgiveness is like holding a sword, but you're not holding it by the hilt, you're holding it by the blade. And the tighter you hold that unforgiveness, the more you're just hurting yourself, and the more you're just hindering yourself. You're not hurting them, right? Like, if I try to use that sword against you, I'm hitting you with the hilt. Like, I'm not hurting you, but the tighter I hold on to it, I'm hurting myself, and I'm hindering myself from growing. And there are fewer ways that we get the opportunity to love like Christ than when we can forgive. When somebody wrongs me, when someone really genuinely hurts me, that is, it's very difficult. It's a lot easier to say this and to theorize this than to actually live it out. But when someone hurts me, that is such a blessing, because I get to be more like Christ when I say, I forgive you. Like, that is an opportunity for me to be like Christ.
I think in what you were saying, like, when you give forgiveness, like, it's no longer between you and that person. What that person chooses to do and how they choose to live, like, if they choose to continue to treat you bad, or choose to continue to be mad at you or hate you or things like that, like, it's no longer between you and them, but it's between them and God, because you've done your part, because yes, I am quoting him, but you now released it, you've let it go, and it's like, now you can let it be, and you can love them. But if they don't love you back,
That's
keep
between
loving
them
them.
and God.
If they want to keep hating on you, then that was like a little ghetto for a second.
They want to keep hating. Yeah, exactly. No, that's so true though. So good.
When David comes up to Saul in the cave, and it's a very familiar story, but of course, Saul has been trying to kill him for zero reason for quite a while. He's hiding in the cave. He's with his men, and he's hiding in this cave. And in that very same cave, Saul comes to relieve himself, and he's very vulnerable in that moment. And it's really interesting, because in the text it says that David's men tell him, go do what's right in your own eyes. And David pushes back against that, and he goes and he just tears off the cloak. And even then, the Bible says his heart is stricken, that he even did that.
That he even touched the anointed.
Exactly. And that's such a powerful sentiment, not just because Saul was the anointed king at that time, but because David refused to let. So what was right in his own eyes was that unforgiveness of, I just kill him. He's tried to kill me multiple times. I'm innocent. He's wrong.
And if you're looking from a moral perspective, not religious, but a moral perspective, David would have been right to kill him.
Everybody
100%.
knows Saul's the bad guy and David's the good guy. Like, David hasn't done anything wrong at this point. Like, he's this pure shepherd boy who's just running for his life. Like, he is totally in the right to kill him. And even in the Old Testament, we would not blink if David killed Saul. We would not think anything about him.
Fit in.
other than that was
Yeah,
God's judgment.
right.
Like it fits right in with the
God is
Old
delivered.
Testament narrative. But David decided that he wasn't going to hold that unforgiveness in his heart.
Yeah, that was good.
I think when you don't forgive somebody and you let that anger and that resentment build up, you're letting them have authority over not only your happiness, but your relationship with God. And if you're not careful, that resentment can become your new God. And so whenever you forgive somebody, you let that go. And there will be times where you'll forgive somebody and they'll look at you and be like, I could care less, or I couldn't care less, But it's not about them. It's about how do I get back to the King.
And I think, I had something that I was going to say. I think when it comes to forgiveness, I was hoping that line was going to strike it back up. No, so
I didn't have a plan after that.
So there was something I was going to say. What did you just say? Because I feel like it's my mind, like.
I said talking about how whenever you don't forgive somebody, you're giving them control over you. You're giving them power. No?
It's gone. We're cooked.
It's gone.
And the
Oh,
podcast.
my days.
I think that's a good place to end, guys.
I hate that, actually.
All right, everybody. Thank y'all
I'm
so
kidding.
much.
I'm kidding.
Wait.
I'm joking.
Talk about. You can go off on something else if you have something, but I'm really trying to bring that thought back.
We'll wait. It's okay. They'll wait too.
Oh my goodness.
You'll wait.
Oh,
All right, while
now
we're
that's
thinking-
pressure.
You'll wait.
While Victor's waiting, while you're waiting, I do want to talk about something I do.
We're cutting that out.
Nope. Something I do want to talk about, okay, is in the Western world and in the sacrilegious world, we have used the love of Christ as an excuse to let people get away with whatever they want. Is that what you were going to say?
No.
Oh,
Okay.
Go.
So what I was
Just
going
got
to
it.
say is that when it comes to forgiveness,
Good
Good heavens.
something that helps me to forgive, and we're not even talking. Forgiveness, loving is a part of forgiveness, but something that helps me forgive, and that has helped me to forgive, is that I realize I'm not forgiving people because they've done this or they've done that, right? And I start looking at myself, and I'm like, who am I to not forgive them when I've made mistakes?
Yeah.
When I've said things I wish I never said. When I've treated people in certain ways that I wish I've never treated them. And it's like, what helps me forgive is realizing that I needed God just as much as they need God.
I still need God.
Yeah, right.
As
Like
much as they
I
need.
need forgiveness just as much as they do. I show forgiveness because I've been forgiven. I show grace because grace has been given to me. I show love because God has shown me what love is. And it's like, I think that's why, I'm just saying that's kind of what's helped me, just reflecting on, as much as I've needed forgiveness, they need it as well. And, who am I to hold it? Who am I to withhold that from them? That makes sense. Sorry that took forever to come
That's
up
good.
into my
It's
mind.
good.
That was good. I don't have anything else to say.
I have one more thing on love. It's not super related. It's not a great segue, but I think it's cool. So I'll at least say that. I've talked too much. It's
No,
okay.
You're
I'm
the guest.
kicking me off.
We want to have Josiah back more.
John,
Recurring guest, by the way.
not a
Maybe not
recurring
a
guest.
guest. Maybe he'll just be like a rotating,
Not a recurring guest.
You will be.
John
whether you like it or not.
John 11:33 through 38, the narrative of when Lazarus dies, Jesus isn't there. He waits, and then he comes. Verse 33 is when he's getting there, and it says, "When Jesus therefore saw her weeping, and the Jews also weeping, which came with her, he groaned in the spirit and was troubled, and said, 'Where have you laid him?' They said unto him, 'Lord, come and see.'" It's like the first aspect of this, not the main aspect of what I want to talk about from this specific section, but the first aspect is Jesus and God. They don't love in a way, I say they, not a plurality. He does not love in a way. I'm about to get. I've never. Whoa.
Jesus, God,
he-
all of them, they're all the same entity.
3 in 1.
3 in 1.
He does not love in a distant, far away way where he doesn't understand the things you're going through. Like, God doesn't love you like just this floating person in the sky who's never experienced what you're experiencing. But we see how when Jesus goes through life, he's not just there, and he doesn't just do miracles, but Lazarus was someone he loved, and he was troubled, and he groaned in his spirit, and he's mourning with them. He knows he's about to raise him from the dead, but the reality of death still causes him to mourn, and the people that he loves in pain still causes him to mourn, just as a very human emotion because he was fully human.
And also, I think as a way to sympathize with the people around him.
Yeah, and then we go 2 verses further, verse 35. Jesus wept, the shortest verse in the Bible, but it's powerful because he's not just even just groaning inside of him. He's not just feeling it with him, but he is feeling the full force of my friend just died.
Mm-hmm.
Death just won over my friend, and there's real pain and real agony there. And there's not a pain that you or me or you can feel that he hasn't felt a greater extent to, or at the very least the same extent.
Right.
But the really cool part about this that I really like, then it says, Jesus wept, and then it says, then said the Jews, behold how he loved them. So his love was so evident there. And some of them said, cannot this man which opened the eyes of the blind have caused that even this man should not have died? And Jesus, therefore, again, groaning in himself, cometh to the grave. It was a cave, and a stone lay upon it. And it's so interesting when you delve into, so I got this from this book, Gentle and Lowly, The Heart of Christ for Sinners and Sufferers. If you have not heard of this book, it's not a super popular book. It's at Barnes & Noble. Go to Barnes & Noble and buy this book, and then buy Deeper by the same author, Dane Ortland. They will change your life.
Everything.
They will. This is not in the same category as everything else. They will change your life. But there's this excerpt of it where he talks about Jesus' love is not a weak love, right? And so what Jesus is experiencing here is not just a groaning of grief, but to directly quote from the book, but it's of irrepressible anger. The emotion which tore his breast and clamored for utterance was just rage. Warfield goes on to consider the role that the Lazarus episode plays in John's gospel as a whole. He says, inextinguishable fury seizes upon him. So when you look at what those words, when it talks about, when it says he groaned in the spirit, and then later, therefore again, groaning in himself cometh to the cave, those words aren't like a pity party, and he's just sad, but it's inextinguishable fury. It is death that is the object of his wrath, and behind death him who has the power of death, and whom he has come into the world to destroy. Tears of sympathy may fill his eyes, but this is incidental. His soul is held by rage. The raising of Lazarus thus becomes not an isolated marvel, but a decisive instance and open symbol of Jesus' conquest of death and hell. What John does for us is to uncover for us the heart of Jesus as he wins for us our salvation, not in cold unconcern, but in flaming wrath against the foe. Jesus smites in our behalf. He has not only saved us from the evils which oppress us, but he has felt for and with us in our oppression, and under the impulse of these feelings has wrought our redemption. So number one, his love doesn't come from a faraway place. But number two, his love towards you is also anger towards the work of the enemy, the work of sin, death, hell, and the grave that are coming against you. He's not just, I'm going to love you, but I'm not going to do anything about it. I'm going to love you, and this thing is coming against you, this giant, this Goliath, this sin that you're struggling with, death, the eventual end. And he said, I'm going to sacrifice myself to defeat that for you.
That's good.
Like, you and I don't have to beat Goliath. We don't have to be David. Because when Jesus died on the cross, he slayed all our giants. There's no sin that can come against us. Not even death can come against us. Because he won that victory. All we have to do is understand that he did win that victory and stop fighting battles against a fallen foe and understand and be in Christ and say, no, he already did this for me because he loved me so much that he took decisive, wrathful action against sin, against death, so that I would have the opportunity to not have to fear those things. I don't have to be afraid of death because he died and he defeated death. I don't have to be afraid of sin because he lived a life without sin. He proved that it was possible. He lived the life I couldn't live so that I could be with him, so that I had just a chance of being with him in eternity.
So good. I don't have anything to say. That was good. I think that summarized everything.
Yeah. You know what? I was gonna be content with ending it there, but I love this chapter, and I think this is how we're gonna end it. And this is Paul. That was great, by the way.
I love Paul.
Leave it there. It's
And
a photo.
it's
Like-
in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. He says, though I speak with tongues of men and of angels and have not charity, meaning love, I have become a sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. And now I'm just going to switch charity to love, just for the viewers
the
here.
Bible.
Just for you.
And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith, so that I can remove mountains and have not love, I am nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned and have not love, it profiteth me nothing. Love suffereth long, and is kind. Love envieth not. Love vaunteth not itself, and is not puffed up. Doth not behave itself unseemly, seeketh not her own, and is not easily provoked. Thinketh no evil, rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in the truth. Beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. Love never faileth. All these things that he covered, he said, I can do this and I can do that. You can do all these things, prophesy, speak in tongues, but if you don't have love, it profits you nothing. And I think that's how we're going to end this. Like,
Crazy.
love God.
The greatest poem ever written.
Yeah, love God and love people. And that's all God wants us to do. Not all he wants us to do. There is so much more.
Everything comes from that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
If we don't have love, then no matter what good work you do, no matter how good you sing a song, no matter how good you serve, if there's not love behind it, it will profit you nothing.
So true. I think that was a good episode. Josiah, thank you.
Thank you so much for coming out.
for coming on.
Vote Kamala.
I appreciate you. Oh my goodness. I appreciate you, brother. And we hope you guys enjoyed the episode.
We'll have him back, hopefully soon. We want him back. I don't care what he says. If he loves us, he'll come back.
We'll see if what he said today is true when he comes back. Because that would be showing me love.
We'll see. We'll find out.
We'll see. We'll see y'all
Come
next
back
time.
next time.
Thank you guys.